Welcome back to the Energy Matters pod class. We do this once a month. It is free. You can come live and ask us questions on Zoom and meditate with us in the energy, or you can watch and listen afterwards on, Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube, wherever you like. But if you come on Zoom, you get to meditate with us. And yeah, if you have a burning question, you get to bring it in with you. So welcome back. Today's topic is quieting the noisy mind. And we're gonna jump into that in a moment. Just one quick announcement, which is me and Cody are doing a monthly Learning to See Energy class that is next Tuesday, and that topic is similar, learning how to turn the analyzing part of us down so that we can see energy more clearly. So we're going to kind of build on this one today. And we're going to India in September. If you want to come with us, that's the second announcement. That's right. All right. And
Right.
that's about all I got. And Cody's drinking fizzy seltzer water today. So that's the third announcement.
Yeah. And I won't even get brand specific because it's not LaCroix, which is, the
Yeah.
thing.
We should get a sponsorship, Cody. We've been doing this
Yeah,
10 years.
I
We don't
know.
have a single sponsor.
No, we don't.
we this is
We
the
need to
Energy Matters. Yeah, we should get like Monster energy drinks or something, right? Something with energy in it.
something with energy and it would really make sense. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll think about the sponsor thing. Oh my gosh. All right. Let's jump in. It's good to be back with you. I just got back from Spain. I'm back in my studio in Boulder, and it's nice to be home and in this energy. And you're in your studio in Oregon. I'll put Cody's address in the comments for everyone later if you want to stop by his house. Um,
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Of course, of course. And so today's topic is on learning how to quiet the noisy mind. But I think we want to approach it from the perspective of the energy work that we do, right? So if you want to release some energy, if you want to learn to see your answers, to see energy, you have to have a relatively quiet mind and grounded space and energy, right? And so when we start doing intuitive training kind of energy work, one of the first things we learn is how to clear the noise out of our heads and how to center ourselves in our heads, which Cody, I think you're going to guide us at the end in a
We'll do a
meditation
little
through that.
meditation on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And from an energetic perspective, maybe we could start by just discussing what is all the noise in our heads. What is that experience like? How do we recognize it? And how do we release it? And is it all just do you have multiple personality disorder, and is it all you? Is it noise from the external world? Is it a mix? What's become really popular these days is internal family systems, IFS, and the book, which I actually have my teacher training students read, No Bad Parts, and that entire part of psychology has to do with all of the noise, all of the voices in our heads, and the roles that they play. And that's become really,
Mm,
I would say,
it
prominent in
has.
consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
And
interesting thing about this topic to me, or one of the things is in the sense of meditation, like when I talk to people and have talked to people over the years and we talk about meditation, they say, I can't meditate because I can't stop thinking. I can't quiet the noisy mind. And it almost as if that's a prerequisite to starting to be able to meditate. And I think we have a little different perspective on that when we start to talk about energy work and seeing. We do work on clearing the energy out of our heads, and we do work towards maybe having a bit of a quieter mind. But a lot of what we do is not quieting it to nothingness. It's starting to direct our attention, starting to direct what we're kind of doing with our energy and our mind into something. And that's a very different movement than just sitting there and trying to quiet the mind and have nothing happen. That's impossible. But you can certainly focus your mind on noticing energy and becoming aware of it, getting centered and grounded and doing things. And that, to me, takes the place of a lot of thinking. It starts to
Mm.
shift it from just thinking into a different perspective or place of seeing and being aware from. Otherwise, most of our awareness is just thought. And it can be overthinking, it can be problem solving, it can be self criticizing, it can be all kinds of things. But that's a very different kind of state of awareness than energy awareness, where we're starting to see things and get input, read them, which may come in the form of thought, but it's a very directed type of a space, not just a nothingness.
And
Yeah.
if you want to see things clearly, you have to be able to see through the noise. And a lot of
Yeah.
times when people start on this intuitive journey, all they get is all the noise and like I can't see an image or I can't see clearly. There's just too much noise. And so we do have to start out with a foundation of getting still and relaxed and releasing. We can release some of the external noise. I think if you sit and meditate daily and you have a solid practice, some of the noise will subside for sure. Not all of it, but I do think you can get to a like a baseline of a more stable, relaxed mind and space. And then from there, some of the noise might actually be useful. You might go, oh, there's a family member in my head, or there's an energy that I've been struggling with, I'm ruminating on that actually might need some of my attention. There's energy that's manifesting here. It might be manifesting as images or mental noise, but it's actually relevant, and I need to take a look at it and sit with it. So there's many, grades and kinds of noise. Sometimes we have an inner voice of ours screaming for attention, and it needs attention. And other times it's just junk from social media or coming from the outside. I was mentioning to you, Cody, that we should do an episode on the telepathy tapes at some point, which is
Yeah.
this year's been like the most popular podcast in the world. And if you haven't heard of it, it's a study a scientist did on nonverbal communication with, I believe, children with special needs of various kinds and how they were being telepathic with their parents and caretakers. Really extraordinary. I have to finish listening to it before we can do an episode about it. But there is that whole aspect as well of taking in information and energy from the external world. A lot of the time, we think when we're thinking that every thought we have is our own, we don't realize a lot of that energy comes from the outside. Just like as an empath, a lot sometimes what you feel aren't your feelings. You're feeling feelings that and energy that you're bringing in from the external world, but because you're feeling them in your body, you naturally think, "Oh, these are my
They're
feelings."
yours.
This is
Yeah.
where most empaths get stuck, right? Is feeling the world,
You can't
thinking
tell the
everybody's
difference.
pain.
Yeah.
Can't tell. Same with
Yeah.
thought, right?
Same with thought.
You might be
I like
bringing
what
it
you
all in.
said about the thought and the noise. It's like just it it can be overwhelming and noisy, but that doesn't mean it all isn't relevant. Like discernment is basically what we start to move towards when we get into a place of seeing energy. We start to be able to tell the difference between what is something I need to interact with or get a little more information about, and what is something that just is noise, is totally irrelevant to me. And we might do that at an emotional level as we come out of being kind of caught in the clairsentient ability and we move to seeing, and we do that at a mental level as well.
Oh, I think I froze or you froze.
You did freeze.
Okay.
One of us froze, yeah.
Uh, so yeah, at some point we should do a whole thing on telepathy and explore that whole realm. That would be really fun.
Yeah.
Um, I know from my own experience meditating over the years, that yes, the noise never goes away because sometimes we're just digesting energy, information, and feelings, and some of those bubble up. An emotion or a feeling will bubble up like a bubble in water to the top, and then it'll form into a thought. So you might have just a sensation or a feeling that will then form into a thought like, that's itchy. I don't like this. It's hot. I want to go that way. Why'd she say that? And you start, and it turns into thought. So a lot of thought is the body coming into consciousness in the form of thought or in the form of an image. And then as that gets complex, we have an idea, we might have a principle, we might build an entire philosophy, a belief system, and a worldview. So when we chain a bunch of thoughts together and they start to make sense to us, that creates how we frame and perceive the world for better and for worse. It gives us stability, a direction in life, right? If you have a belief system, a standard of ethics and behavior, and it can also imprison you, like religion and politics do for people. You start to over identify with these complex beliefs that are made up of thoughts, and then you see the world through this incredible filter. And that is probably the cause of almost all human
Right.
confrontation and violence and suffering and pain is different people's complex thoughts turn into beliefs, worldviews clashing. But really, internally, it's consciousness looking through a bunch of pictures out at the world and a bunch of filters and identifying with those. And the most extreme of that would be like someone willing to blow themselves up for what they believe. They believe the picture, their belief in their head so much that they'll give up their life. All right. Or if you want to induce someone to do that, you brainwash them over time, be more patriotic, whatever it is, to the point where it becomes so emotional and they believe it so deeply and identify their identity completely with that thought, with that belief system. And that's what you see mostly in the media and in the world is these complex thought structures fighting with each other. And we can, at a certain point, we can call those egos. An ego is a bunch of those thought structures that come together and to form an identity. And so my identity is everything I believe combined. And don't you dare challenge that, Cody. Okay?
Yeah. Because you got some wacky
uh,
beliefs.
yeah.
Yes.
And that's conflict, isn't it? So, how do we, as energy workers, as meditators, maybe awaken out of that, release some of that energy so we can get clear answers and see the world with less of a filter or a bias?
Yeah. I wonder, as you talk about that, I wonder how much, as we move, say, into being energy workers or meditators, how much like normally we are processing all that input, all that emotion, all that information that's in us through thought. And as we start to become meditators and start to move into a place of looking, we start to process so much of that from that state. And so then the thinking lessens. Because I have found over time of meditating, working energy, that the thinking just lessened kind of on its own. It's not like I attacked it as a thing to solve. It just moved from being a very noisy mind to being a mind that could be focused on a question and hold that. And that's like the whole thing, the whole thought, or focused on looking at something. And that becomes the whole experience. But there was an aspect of that that seems like it was quite natural with the practice.
Mm. And you work, so you work through energy, right? And certain energy sticks to us for certain reasons. So not all noise sticks in our head, right? Everyone is susceptible to certain kinds of noise more easily, just like an empath is more susceptible to certain people's pain in their life or certain kinds of pain, right? And so you have to become aware as a meditator what kind of noise seems to come in and stick easily, and then ask the question why. Why is there such a nice landing pad for this certain kind of mental energy? And usually underneath that there's some kind of pattern belief, some kind of pain that needs attention. I often look at the noise as something that's energy that needs attention versus trying to push it away or force the volume knob down so that there's no noise. What do a lot of people do instead? They medicate, sleeping pills, avoid, overreact, all sorts of ways to not sit with and face the noise, right? Addiction. I think a lot of addiction is trying to quiet that noise inside of us that's saying, hey, there's some pain here that needs attention.
Yeah.
But a good meditator will face that noise and sit with it and go, what are you? Where are you coming from? And then it'll subside as you work through some of those layers. Maybe the one of the biggest ailments in the human species right now, and causes of suffering, is mental noise. That is at the very top of the list.
True.
Solve it for us, Cody.
Because it that leads to anxiousness, anxiety, all kinds of things. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that there's that aspect you were just talking about that you confront the noise. Also, over time in meditating, you start to disengage. Like maybe one of the questions is, well, what caused me to engage with that noise as a conversation in my head? Like what caused me to start to argue with it or try to change it or make it different versus just recognize it and then let it go. Like, yeah, that noise is there or that telepathic input is there. I don't need to jump into that conversation though. And then you start to release it as you disengage from having to have some kind of interaction or input with it.
And a lot of students that take our class are empaths, and so they're used to this experience on a feeling level. Um, but there's a very similar dynamic happening on a mental level. And so you can be an empath who feels, and then all that turns into noise, or
Yeah.
vice versa. You might be very telepathic or open. Your mind is so open, you just absorb so much noise from the world. And then it turns into feelings. Like I feel anxious, I feel stressed, I feel like I never want to go outside because all of that noise is so painful. And if you are a sensitive being, then the mental noise of the world can be very intense and painful. It's like, oh, this is too much. And a lot of people either override that or run away from it, or they just live with it and never really feel at peace. I can't honestly say I know that many people that are really calm and at peace inside themselves and are not struggling with all of that mental noise or just consider
Yeah.
it normal about their day. And then what happens is you start talking to yourself out loud, and the mental noise becomes so intrusive that it starts verbalizing. I've done it. We've all done it, but I've seen it happen. Eckhart Tolle shares this story of watching this man talking to himself on the train or bus, and then he follows him into a building. Turns out he was some professor maybe, and he had mental noise like everyone else, except it got so loud it just started externalizing, and and so it's like the noise is spilling out. It just starts spilling, it starts spilling out, and if we don't learn how to rein it in and deal with it, then we're never going to be able to be connected to our energy and find our answers because there's just too much. It's like this. What's the word, like when the old TVs, you'd have to hit them, it would just be that
Too
black and
much
white, the stuff
static. Yeah.
like
It's
that.
just all static.
Thank you, that all that static in the head. And good luck making your way through life through that cloud of static. So how do we as meditators close our eyes, become aware of the noise, recognize it, learn how to release it, and then, be present. That is one, I think, one of the great spiritual practices, journeys, and challenges of like our generation of human beings. I don't think it was in the past as much when people lived in small groups in the forest or in caves, or, before maybe we were very verbal as a species. I don't know if it will be in the far future, but at the moment, we have this massive epidemic of mental noise. And I heard one teacher say, intention deficit disorder. So not just attention deficit
Mm.
disorder, but intention deficit disorder, because there's so much noise we can't focus enough to lay down a
Yeah.
path and an intention.
I think once we just let AI do all of our thinking, then we'll have no noise because we won't have anything to think about. That's like 2 years away.
Now, then we'll just be thinking about how anxious we are that we gave our power away to
Oh,
AI.
way to AI. Yeah. It is interesting when we're talking about noise because we're talking about noise in the head, but that doesn't mean the source is just in your head. Like when someone comes into our training and we teach them how to turn down the that empathy part, turn down the clairsentience, very often the comment that we get is, "Oh wow, it's so quiet all of a sudden." So all the noise that they were in and experiencing, or a good portion of it, was coming not from their head, it was coming from the energy they were experiencing through their clairsentience. And so sometimes we can be in a lot of noise that is manifesting as just thoughts in our head, but it actually originated as an energy that we were experiencing in some other aspect of ourselves. And it just ends up, we're trying to process it in our head instead of from a meditative energy standpoint, we would process it directly as energy and recognize it. Oh, this is an energy. Oh, this isn't mine. I can let go of it. Or, oh, this is mine. There's an answer in it for me. So
I'll,
we
I'll,
move
I'll
into a
do that.
very different place of processing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll do that meditating. If there's noise, I will kind of trace it back to the feeling, or
Yeah.
sometimes back to what in intuitive training we would call the picture. And often people will, as we say in intuitive training, get stuck on a picture. So there's a mental image that we just get over identified with, or it's charged like a particle, like a charged particle. It might be charged with pain or some form of energy, and it we get caught in it. We can't seem to release it, work through it, see the world without that filter. And we all have them. And when we do intuitive training, we learn how to work through these pictures. Maybe there's a picture that you're not good enough, and there's a picture that there's not enough time. Maybe there's a picture that the world is unfair, or that there's a picture that nobody loves you. So there's the idea, there's the belief, there's the feeling that you might have. I feel nobody loves me. I believe it. And then there's also possibly an image somewhere in your consciousness, deep in the unconscious. Maybe it's a memory or it's a manufactured image, and it has a charge to it. And so you can get stuck on that picture, as we would say in intuitive training. Nobody loves me. And there's that, and it just sometimes I see it like float around a person, almost like the moon around the earth. It has an orbit. Every once in a while, it makes its way back every few hours or every few days and just reminds you nobody loves you. And it goes, and then, like, what, did I hear something? Was that here? And then it comes back a few days later, nobody loves you. And then another one comes up, you're not good at this. Another
Yeah.
one, like satellites all over the earth. They just, they
Yeah.
come around. And what people who are, judgmental, whether they do it consciously or unconsciously, they know which pictures you have. They can sense it. and then they, as we say in intuitive training, they poke them. So if you have an insecurity around not being loved and somebody's judgmental, maybe they come around, they just stick their finger in one of those images, and it's like, ow, like, oh, so you're not loved, huh? And they just kind of hit, they, as we would say, press your button. But what they're doing is pressing on your picture. And if you work through that picture and you release it, then there's nothing to be pressed on. And that's how we become free of all of the energy that controls us and puts us into suffering. When we work through these images and we really heal them and release them, then there's nothing for the world or an individual to press on. And as most relationships, intimate or otherwise, is two people pressing on their pictures. You said that, you did this, you're not good enough now. What, remember 2 years ago, bat, 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 hitting the buttons. But as meditators, we learn how to identify, oh, there's a picture here. That's the charge on it, and then work through it. And when we do, intuitive readings, we also learn how to see those in others. Sometimes even maybe another way to think of it or look at it is like post-its. You might like see, sometimes you'll see like a post-it on somebody's energy field.
Yeah.
There's nice ones, there's not nice ones, there's neutral ones. There's ones the world put on them. There's ones they put on themselves, their family put on them. Or some of them, you have 100 of the same genre. You got a whole section of that
Right.
kind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And much of the noise in that scenario is it's not even the picture itself. It's that we start to kind of argue with it or start to have thoughts relative to countering it. So it's a reaction to the picture that creates the noise. The noise itself or the picture itself is just that. It's got a charge on it and it just says, like, you're not good enough. But then if I hit that, I might either there's a voice that agrees, and so I get real self-critical, or there's a voice that doesn't agree, so I start to argue with, whatever caused that picture to get lit up with the person. And that generates a tremendous amount of thought and kind of noise in our head. And the funny thing is that kind of noise never resolves it. That argument never resolves it. The way we resolve it is we start to see it for what it is. Oh, this is a picture. And we start to take the charge out of it and, in a sense, disidentify with it. Because identifying with it doesn't necessarily mean, um, oh, I like it. It just means, oh, I think it's me. So now I have to fight against it because it's part of my identity. So once we take that step to learn how to recognize those kinds of things and de-energize them, and they don't have that power, like you say, then you're free. That's how you get free of being affected by energies.
And someone was asking, are the pictures the triggers themselves? The pictures are what get triggered, right? So
Yeah,
yes, I have a picture floating around, I'm not good enough, and then somebody presses on it like a button. It's the way in for energy. So if you don't have, let's say you're very, very comfortable accepting of who you are. You worked through mountains of invalidation, rejection, lack of self-love, whatever it is, and you've really come to a healing place. And you've worked through a lot of those memories, traumas, pictures, whatever they are. Then if somebody comes around and criticizes you, you're not worth 2 cents. It might just pass right through you, right? Like if I came up to the Buddha and was like, "You're not a good teacher," he might just be like, "Okay." Versus if you've been sitting with a picture of like, "Man, I am not freaking good enough at something," and then someone says something, that thing gets lit up like one of the bulbs on a Christmas tree, you know, like a light, bing. And that's when you get what you call triggered, like, oh, how could they said that about me? You know, and that whole thing starts. Um, and then you either externalize the response towards someone else, screw them, they're wrong, I hate them, they're mean, or you internalize it. They're right. I'm bad. I'm not good enough. And I'm
Mhm.
revalidating that picture. So you can reject the picture or you can accept it. And both ways, it's not helpful because it's still there. You have to learn
Yeah.
how to actually look at it through the illusion and get to the other
Yeah.
side. Yeah.
Yeah. Both ways, you're not free or controlling your energy. It's being directed by that picture, whether you're rejecting it or accepting it. Yeah. And the world is very accommodating. If you have a picture that says, I'm not good enough, and you go out in the world, someone will agree with that and tell you you're not good enough. Because the world seeks to validate whatever you got going on.
Yeah, and to add to that, you'll attract people
Right.
with either the same pictures as you or the opposite that like particles opposites attract, as they would say. So either someone to trigger it or someone to validate it. So either way, those if you have very strong images that are created from thoughts and beliefs, as we mentioned earlier, they will start to create the reality around you. And we've talked about this before, but what we see happening a lot in spirituality is instead of working through my pictures or my energy, I'm just going to create a new one, which is I'm abundant. I can manifest what I want. I'm pure love, whatever it is. I'm rich, right? So the person is not working through their pictures. They're just creating a new one. And then they're pumping energy into it and plastering it all over the world to the point where maybe they're physically putting it out in the world. Like, here's my whole Instagram is me being abundant or me being happy. They're literally placing pictures out into the world.
Hmm.
Look at my pictures. Look at my pic. This is who I am. This is who I am. But if they don't work through their actual pictures, they're not really abundant. They're trying to override the other pictures that say they're not abundant. So if I'm forcing a picture, it's probably because I feel the opposite is true. If I have to 10,000 times say I'm abundant, it's probably because I feel not abundant, right? If somebody's truly in abundance, they're not screaming to the world, I'm abundant. Um, what they're doing is trying to create new pictures versus work through them and be free energetically. So I think there's a kind of confusion in spirituality there between those two things, and I just wanted to mention that and clarify it. So
Yeah. That's
working
a
through a
good
picture
point
versus creating one. Yeah.
to clarify because I mean, we do teach how to create pictures that you want to work toward or bring into your life or create something, but a lot of our focus is on working through these levels of picture, which ultimately is thought and mental noise that hold us back in some way or keep us stuck in some way. Because regardless of how much you create those new pictures, that the real picture that you have that you're trying to override will always win out. It will always get triggered and it has more force until we've processed it because it's in us versus something we're projecting out in the world. So we have to work those inner pictures or energies that put us into whatever that space is that of I'm not good enough or I can't have anything or I'm not worth having anything or nobody will like me. If we don't work through those, it doesn't matter what we create on the outside. When those get stimulated, they will override whatever we've created because they have all the charge.
Sometimes when Cody's sleeping, I energetically just put a bunch of those pictures in his aura, just like whenever I wanted to screw with him the next day, I place them in there.
I found
Yeah,
that.
you're a jelly bean. Sign up for my MLM or whatever it is.
Yeah. I wake up in the morning. Why do I have this desire for jelly beans for breakfast?
So maybe one other way we could frame the mental. noise, and then Cody could do a meditation with us. We'll do a Q&A quickly and then
Yeah.
meditation. But the way I like to think of thoughts forming, when you learn how to read books, you start with a letter. You learn the alphabet, then you string letters together that make words, words that make sentences, sentences, paragraphs, paragraphs, pages, chapters, book, volumes, right? So it's similar in my experience with thoughts. Like you can have an individual thought, right? And then you can have a string of thoughts. It might turn into like an idea or a concept, a more complex version, a principle, a philosophy, an ethic, a belief structure, right? And so maybe as a meditator, you could just start to notice the simplicity and the complexity of some of the thoughts that you're having and how many of them are really basic, just popping in and out, versus how, the really good creative ones are needles in a haystack. The vast majority of thoughts that we have are very basic and repetitive, and they usually have to do with survival. I'm going to be late. I'm hungry. That's dangerous, so they bubble up. And then the next level could be more emotionally complex. And then eventually we get to the more creative, spiritual, bigger thinking stuff. But the majority are that just like repetitive body level stuff. So as you start meditating and you sit still, if you sit still for 20 or so minutes and meditate, some of the baseline noise will subside. And then you can get to some of the more complex stuff. And as thoughts become more complicated, eventually they do form into these mental images that we're talking about, or even feelings will come up and form into mental images. And that's where the fun part of reading energy comes in, when you start seeing mental images. And we can also have a spiritual vision. So there's a quality of picture that not all pictures are bad. I don't want to make it seem like me and Cody are saying all pictures are bad in some way, because you can have a very clear image that gets downloaded from the universe, your higher self, wherever it is, and it's a clear vision for your life or for humanity that's really special and beautiful. But to get to something creative or spiritually inspiring, you might have to find that needle in the haystack by getting through some of those layers of noise and pain. So that is at the foundation what we do as meditators. And then when it gets really interesting as readers, we start to learn to read images and the energies around the images in ourselves or in others. And that's what I find so fun and fascinating. There's nothing better than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly all pictures aren't bad. I think when we're talking about clearing out noise, much of what it is that those pictures aren't ours. We got them from somewhere. There's somebody else's belief. There's somebody else's opinion, somebody else's judgment that we took in. And then that becomes very noisy because we're having to then reconcile all that energy that's not ours. So when we're meditating and clearing out energy, what we're moving toward is discovering our own pictures, our own thoughts, our own
Mm.
information, if you will,
And
our own
so,
spiritual insight. Yeah.
Cody, someone was saying, correcting me earlier, it's not from the telepathy tapes, nonverbal autistic kids or neuroatypical autism. I'll have to listen to more of it, and I
Yeah.
don't really have a theory as
I
to
haven't
why, but
listened to it yet, so I have
yeah,
to
you
listen
know,
to it.
for whatever reason, these kids, their minds work differently. Maybe there's less mental noise. They're more tapped in, and so they can do this nonverbal communication better than the rest of us. I think we all have it. Um, I wonder if it's something akin to like when someone is blind, they can feel and hear better
Hear
and
more.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we
Um,
all do have telepathy. I mean, and I'm sure most people have a story where they've experienced it in some way. At least most people pursuing this kind of work tend to
yeah.
have those types of stories where something happened and it was just like, wait, what? This had to be happening on some other level than the physical. and verbal. Even the experience of thinking of someone and then they call is we experience their energy and attention. Maybe there's a little telepathy as they put their attention on us, and we receive that before we receive the phone call. That's a very common psychic experience with energy.
Yeah. Very brief story. I had a friend also named David years ago when I lived in Hawaii. I hadn't spoken to him in months, and it was a Friday afternoon or midday, and I just had this thought in my head it arose out of nowhere, which is always a telltale sign. Like, where'd you come from? Almost like a surprise thought, and it was like, call David. So I called him. I was like, hey man, it's been a long time. Are you okay? And he's like, no, I need to go to the hospital right now. Can you pick me up? And he hit the hospital. And it pinged in my head. I picked him up in 5 minutes. We got there, and it turned out he had one of the first cases of dengue fever in Hawaii. And they spent hours, these doctors, they could not figure out why he was so sick. They couldn't. And then eventually it was in the news and it spread across the island. But he was like the first or one of the first cases. And I was just sitting there twiddling my thumbs, call David.
Wow.
And so we'll have those like pings, but we have to learn how to listen to those pings. That's part of the process. If you don't listen, they don't come back as much, has been my experience. So the more you open up and go, oh, I will validate that, the more your system, whatever it is, says, oh, okay, he's listening. So here it is again and again. I just remember we were pulled over by the cops. I was driving so fast to the hospital, and I was like, he's really sick, and it's Hawaii, so the guy's like, "Go on, brother, go." It was wild.
My God. How in
Uh,
the world do you get dengue
yeah,
fever? That's
I don't know how it got to
bad.
Hawaii. That's bad. It was very bad. I had to take
Yeah.
care of him for a while. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, um, yeah. I would love Cody. Oh, real quick before we go into meditation, we have a lot of comments. Any questions before we jump in? Any other questions?
Oh,
Thank
I
you for all
wanted
the
to
beautiful
comment
comments, by the
on
way.
before we jump to that, I wanted to comment on you were talking about how repetitive thought, how much thought is repetitive. And I was trying to remember, but I heard somewhere that it's something like 80 to 90% that of thought is repetitive. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think,
I think it's north of 90%
yeah.
that it is repetitive. I did a little research on this. There used to be a commonly cited figure that was 1,000 thoughts a day, but then some found it actually could be much less than that. But still, the thoughts that we do have do tend to come around again and again and again. And so that rumination for most people will turn into some form of mild anxiety, or eventually, if the whatever the thought is made of isn't it, if you don't give it attention, it'll turn into something more intense or acute,
Right.
and it'll start to run your life.
How
Yeah.
many thoughts a day was this
Uh,
question that you've
some other
heard?
figure I saw was more like, yeah, some other figure I saw was more like in the 7,000
Oh,
range.
okay. I
Maybe
thought
we should do
you
an
cut out and
experiment
I thought you just
ourselves.
I heard you say a
Oh,
thousand and I was like a thousand? I had 1,000
no.
thoughts just the last hour.
Oh, yeah. As Nicole was saying, 80 or 90% of them are 80% are negative, 95% are repetitive. I would
Wow.
believe that.
I
Absolutely.
would
But
believe that too.
if you can pull that needle out of that haystack, one thought could, make a huge difference, change the world, change the trajectory of your life. But you have to learn how to listen and how to look properly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and if you could change that,
Yeah.
I mean, less negative thoughts and just less repetitive, pointless thought, that takes a lot of energy that could otherwise be used in a creative endeavor.
Well, that's why a lot of, people, religious people will pray over and over all day. In Buddhism, they have the beads, mantras, And that is kind of a way to like manage all of those thoughts and direct them into one direction. But once you stop, in my experience, they all flood back in, and it could be, too much forcing versus facing.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, though.
Uh,
Saying the rosary or a mantra takes all those thoughts into just one thought that's repeated over and over.